That's my father. The air in the Vittoria estate was thick with the scent of expensive leather, old money, and the subtle, cloying sweetness of lilies, a scent meant to mask the underlying rot of power. For 17-year-old Alara, it was a world away from the cramped, damp apartment she shared with her mother on the other side of the city. This was her first day, and every polished surface and stern-faced man in a black suit reflected a reality she was only just beginning to understand. Her hands trembled slightly as she carried a silver tray laden with a freshly pressed cappuccino and a small plate of biscotti. The butler, a man named Marco with a face like a granite cliff, had given her explicit instructions. Don't make eye contact. Don't speak unless spoken to. And for the love of God, do not go into the study. The study, of course, was exactly where she was headed. The heavy oak doors were slightly ajar. Alara nudged them open with her hip, her heart hammering against her ribs. The room was cavernous, dominated by a massive mahogany desk. Behind it sat the man everyone in the city spoke of in hushed, fearful tones, Don Salvatore Vittoria. He was in his late 50s, his dark hair slicked back with silver at the temples, his eyes like chips of black ice as he studied a document before him. He didn't look up. On the corner of the desk, he said, his voice a low rumble that sent a shiver down her spine. Alara complied, her movements stiff and robotic. As she leaned forward to place the tray down, her eyes darted around the room, absorbing the opulence, the floor-to-ceiling bookshelves, the dark, oil paintings of stern-looking ancestors, and the ornate fireplace that was cold despite the chill in the air. But her gaze snagged on a single, smaller frame sitting on a corner of the desk, partially obscured by a stack of folders. It was a photograph of a group of men. Young men. They were in front of a vintage car, laughing, arms draped over each other's shoulders. They looked carefree, a world away from the grim-faced enforcers who populated the estate. Her focus narrowed on one of them. He was tall, with kind eyes and a smile that radiated a warmth that seemed utterly out of place in this cold fortress. A smile she knew better than her own. Her breath hitched. The tray in her hands wobbled, and the porcelain cup clattered against the saucer. The Don finally looked up, his eyes narrowing with annoyance. Is there a problem? Alara's blood ran cold. She felt like she was underwater, sounds muffled and distorted. Her vision tunneled until all she could see was that face. The gentle eyes, the crooked grin, the shock of dark hair that always fell over his forehead. It was a ghost, staring back at her from a life she thought she'd buried long ago. The man in the photo was her father. How many times have I told you? He's dead. He died when you were a baby. It was a car accident. Now please, put that away. It's too painful. That was the story her mother, Isabella, had told her for as long as she could remember. There were no photos of him in their home. No stories. Just a deep, abiding silence that filled the void where a father should have been. The memory of her mother's pained face and the snapping of the locket was seared into her soul. But here he was, young, alive, and in the house of the most powerful Mafia boss in the city. The Don watched her, his gaze turning from annoyance to a dark curiosity. I said, "Is there a problem, girl?" His voice was slow, deliberate, a predator toying with its food. Alara couldn't stop herself. The words clawed their way out of her throat before she could even think. That's my father. Her voice was barely a whisper, but in the dead silence of the study, it was like a gunshot. The Don's pen stopped moving. He placed it down with an unnerving precision. What did you say? She pointed a trembling finger at the photograph. Him. In the photo. The man with the blue shirt. That's my father. The Don's face went completely blank. It was a mask of stone, but behind his eyes, a storm was brewing. He slowly leaned back in his leather chair, the springs groaning under the shift of his weight. The temperature in the room seemed to plummet. Get out, he said, his voice dangerously low. No, please, Now, he roared, slamming his fist on the desk. The entire tray of cappuccino and biscotti flew into the air, the cup shattering against the marble floor, the dark brown liquid spreading like a pool of blood. Alara stumbled backward, fear finally overriding the shock. She turned and fled, her footsteps echoing on the polished floors as she ran through the massive house, past the gawking servants and the stone-faced guards. She burst through the heavy front doors and out into the manicured gardens, her lungs burning as she gasped for air. She didn't stop running until she was blocks away, her body heaving with sobs. The image of that photograph was burned into her mind, but it was the look in Don Vittoria's eyes that truly haunted her. It wasn't just anger. It was a profound, gut-wrenching shock. The look of a man whose entire world had just been turned upside down. That evening, Alera's mother, Isabella, was waiting by the window of their cramped apartment. Her face, beautiful but prematurely aged by worry, was etched with a deep concern she usually tried to hide. When Alera burst through the door, pale and shaking, her mother's face went ashen. "Alera, what happened? Did they hurt you?" She rushed forward, clutching her daughter's arms. "It was him, Mama. I saw him." Alera stammered, her voice choked with tears.
"Papa.
"He's alive. He's with the Mafia." Isabella's grip on Alera's arms tightened painfully. All the color drained from her face, and for a terrifying moment, Alera thought her mother was going to faint. Her eyes, which were usually so full of quiet strength, filled with a terror that was absolute and primal. "No," Isabella whispered, her voice a strangled sound.
No, Elara.
"Tell me you're lying. You didn't see anything. You're mistaken." "I'm not," Alera insisted, pulling out her phone to show her a picture she had secretly taken of the photograph. "Look, it's him. I know it's him." Isabella took one look at the screen and let out a cry of anguish, staggering back as if she'd been struck. Her hand flew to her mouth to stifle a sob. "Oh, God. He found us. He finally found us." And then, in a torrent of anguished tears, the truth came pouring out. It wasn't a car accident. It was a mafia war. Her father, a man named Lorenzo, had been a trusted and beloved member of Salvatore Vittoria's inner circle. But he had stumbled upon a conspiracy, a betrayal from within. He was ordered to be silenced. He was supposed to die, Isabella sobbed, clutching a worn pillow to her chest. The Don gave the order.
It was a blood oath.
But a loyal friend of his, a man who owed him his life, he got him out. He faked the accident. They made him leave, to disappear forever if he wanted to live, and to keep us safe. "When did you find out?" Alera asked, her mind reeling. 5 years later. He found a way to send me a message. He couldn't come back, but he wanted me to know the truth. He said he was being forced to work for them, to be a puppet for another family, a rival to the Vittorias. It was his only way to survive. He loved you, Alera. He loved us so much he stayed away. Her mother's voice broke. "I've been living in fear ever since. Fear that Salvatore would find out his plan had failed. Fear that he'd come for us. I thought the danger had passed. I had no idea it was the Don's household you were working for." Alera was reeling. The revelation was a seismic shock to her entire world. The father she'd been told was a ghost was a walking, breathing man, a victim of a world she couldn't comprehend. And she had just announced his existence to the man who had tried to have him killed. The next morning, Alera and Isabella were huddled together, desperately trying to figure out what to do, when a subtle knock came at the door. There was no force behind it, no militant demand. It was hesitant, apologetic. They exchanged a look of pure terror. Alera crept to the door and peered through the peephole. Her heart stopped. It wasn't a squad of thugs. It was a man in his late 40s, with kind eyes and a familiar, crooked smile. It was the man from the photograph. It was her father, Lorenzo. He looked older, his face lined with regret and hidden sorrow, but the warmth in his eyes was unmistakable. It was the same warmth she'd seen in the picture. Alera fumbled with the lock, her hands shaking too much to work it. "Mama, it's him. He's here," she whispered. Isabella let out a choked sob and covered her mouth with both hands. Alera finally managed to open the door. Lorenzo stood there, his hands trembling, his eyes filled with a mixture of desperate hope and abject shame. His gaze found Isabella first. He looked at her as if he was seeing a ghost, his eyes welling with tears. Then his attention turned to Alara, and the dam broke. A single tear traced a path down his weathered cheek. "Please, can I come in?" he asked, his voice hoarse. Isabella nodded, unable to speak. He stepped inside the tiny apartment, which was now filled with an unbearable tension. Isabella rushed into his arms, burying her face in his chest, her body shaking with a mixture of relief and years of pent-up grief. For a long moment, they just held each other, the world outside ceasing to exist. When they finally pulled apart, Lorenzo looked at Alara. His eyes were full of a pain she couldn't imagine. "My little girl," he whispered, his voice cracking. "Look at you. You're so beautiful." He took a hesitant step towards her, his hands reaching out but stopping before they could touch her. Alara stared at him, a whirlwind of emotions swirling inside her: anger, confusion, grief, and a fragile, desperate hope. "You left us," she said, her voice trembling with accusation. "You let us believe you were dead. You broke Mama's heart." "I know," he said, his voice breaking. "I know. I was a coward. When Salvatore found out his order wasn't carried out, he would have killed me, and he would have hunted you both down. This was the only way to keep you safe. But I saw you in the photo," Alara pressed, stepping forward, her own tears finally spilling over. "You're back with the Vittorias. You came to his house today." Lorenzo shook his head. "I didn't come to his house. I've been working as a double agent for the police, a mole in the rival family for years. I've been waiting for the moment to bring Salvatore down for what he did to us. I was one step ahead of him, until today." He looked from Alara to Isabella, his expression one of utter desolation. "When the Don saw you, when he saw that picture, he knew. He knew I had betrayed him. The picture, he brought it out to remind himself of the men he'd lost, the men he'd killed. He keeps it as a trophy. His arrogance was his undoing." "What did he do, Papa?" Alara asked, gripping the doorknob for support. "He came for me himself," Lorenzo said, his voice dropping to a whisper. "He knew my identity, the informant, the rat. He came to my hideout, armed and furious. He didn't want to kill me. He wanted to make me suffer for tricking him. But I was ready. I had evidence of all his crimes. Tax evasion, money laundering, the murders of the men in that photo, including the staged assassination of me. It was all there. I told him I had sent everything to the police, that it was over." Alara and Isabella stood frozen, their breaths held. "Wait," Isabella whispered. He's in custody?" Lorenzo nodded, a sense of exhausted relief washing over his face. "His empire is in ruins. He's in a cell at the federal building. I can't tell you the details. It's safer if you don't know." And then he did something that took their breath away. He dropped his knees in the middle of the small, cluttered living room. He wasn't a Mafia man anymore. He wasn't a double agent. He was just a man, broken by his decisions, overwhelmed by regret, and desperate for his family's forgiveness. "I have nothing. Everything I did to bring him down, to avenge the life he took from us. I wanted you to be able to live without fear." He looked up at Isabella, his eyes shining with unshed tears. "I never stopped loving you, ISA. Not for 1 second. I was a ghost, but I was a ghost who loved you. I did it all for you, for her, because I couldn't live with the shame of what he made me do, of abandoning my family." He turned his gaze to Alara. "I was never able to be your father, but if you let me, if you can find it in your heart to forgive a coward, I will spend the rest of my life trying to make it up to you. I am so sorry." Isabella was the first to move. She knelt beside him, her face streaked with tears, and wrapped her arms around him, holding him as if she would never let him go. "Don't you ever leave me again," she whispered fiercely against his ear. Then they both looked up at Alara, their eyes full of pleading. She stood there, a silent observer to the miracle of her family being pieced together from the fragments of a past she'd never known. Finally, she took a step forward and knelt down, placing her hand on her father's. "I have so many questions," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. I have all the answers, he promised, his voice full of a fragile hope. I will tell you everything. I'll tell you who he was, the man who saved my life. I'll tell you how I found a way to honor him by becoming a man of justice, even if it was in the shadows. I'll tell you everything I should have told you years ago. I'm here now, Elara. I'm not going anywhere. That night, huddled together in a tiny apartment that suddenly felt like the warmest, safest place in the world, a family, fractured by a decades-old conspiracy, finally began to heal. The truth, long hidden and desperately feared, had not only come to light, but had also brought them home. Don Salvatore Vittoria, the man who had torn them apart, was behind bars, his reign of terror finally over. And in the quiet sanctuary of their home, a new chapter began, one not built on secrets and lies, but on the fragile, powerful, and ultimately triumphant bonds of family.